Hello, and welcome to the Licensing Overhaul General Overview presentation. This presentation should provide you with some guidance on the main changes to the Commission's application process. The Commission recently completed an overhaul of its regulations concerning its process for considering applications. This overhaul is more than 5 years in the making and revisits regulations adopted as far back as the start of the Commission. This overhaul affects virtually every aspect of the licensing process. From the moment an applicant begins filling out the appropriate application type to the moment the Commission approves or denies the application, the process has been reviewed for efficiency and consistency. Everyone's application process is now more consistent, transparent, and streamlined than it ever has been, with fewer regulations and fewer forms to be aware of and follow. Because of the scale of this overhaul, the Commission prepared this presentation to promote awareness and clarity in the new licensing regulations package. This presentation goes over 4 main categories of changes in the licensing overhaul, which include clarification of terms used through the new regulations, updates to the licensing structure, which unifies the process across license types to the extent possible, the creation of a Commission-designated agent process, and certain options concerning fees for card rooms. In the regulations are a host of new definitions, which cover both card rooms and third-party providers of proposition player services, as well as their employees. These categories include the main business, the actual business operating the card room of the card room or third party, such as a corporation or a partnership. Second, endorsed owners. This would include shareholders to a corporation or partners to a partnership. Third, supervisors, referred to in the Act as key employees for card rooms, but the same standards would now apply for third party. Lastly, there are rank and file employees, work permittees for card rooms, and similarly situated employees for third parties. Most of the Commission's definitions are now captured and collected at the start of the Commission's regulations. Instead of several different sections which created different and sometimes inconsistent terms to use for specific approval regulations. A few of the chapters still have specific terms, but for the most part, they have been centralized. This means there are no longer specific approval types and terminology across different Commission regulation chapters. Instead, they are all at the start of the regulations. This regulation also clarifies certain definitions for approval types which are not licenses specifically, including temporary licenses and interim licenses. These approvals are not full approvals as approved by the Commission according to the Act, but instead are very limited approvals meant to allow a card room to open or to continue to operate until a Commission decision on the ultimate license application can be made. Additionally, there are initial and renewal licenses, which are really characteristics of normal licenses. If it is your first license, for instance, it is also an initial license. If that license is set to expire, but you renew the license would also be a renewal license. The key distinction is the background investigation requirements that are different. The regulations provide a more direct process for these approval types, which is tailored to discrete and unique circumstances. One important change in these regulations relates to TPPPS employees. In current regulations, there are third-party players and third-party other employees. This was seen as inefficient and denied third-party companies the ability to conduct business most efficiently. These regulations merge those definitions into one definition, TPPPS worker. The previous slide is just another example of how these regulations improve upon current regulatory structure. In the old regulations, there were separate approval processes for each approval type, regardless of whether they were similarly situated. Different definitions for each approval type, which were not interchangeable with other approval types. Different regulation sections for each definition section and approval type, and little to no standardization. These new regulations change the confusing creation and usage of these terms and instead orders most processes and definitions together. As indicated previously, the process is now more streamlined across license types with as much consistency as permitted by law. As such, similarly situated applications in the previously mentioned categories now undergo a comparable application process with a comparable timeline. This means each level category will undergo the same or very similar background and approval process. To begin at the top, card room owners and third-party owners. Next level, card room and third-party supervisors. And lastly, card room and third-party rank and file employees at each level. Importantly, any remaining differences across these categories and processes are not related to regulatory preference, but instead based upon existing California law or the specifics of an applicant's background. Another important change in the regulations is the consolidation of many forms that were created over the course of the Commission's 20-year history. The Commission found in preparing these regulations that many of these forms were duplicative of other approval applications and needlessly interjected inconsistencies. The new regulations replace these prior forms with new category forms that address each applicant from a specific category. The form standardization increases application efficiency for the applicants and also the Bureau as well as Commission. The new regulations also create a process for card rooms to obtain temporary licenses to start operation or to continue operation when a card room owner wishes to sell their operation. This process was previously determined on a case-by-case basis, which left both the Bureau and the applicant uncertain as to what to expect from the Commission and unable to properly prepare. Now, however, the temporary license process is standardized and it explains precisely what an applicant needs to do to obtain the temporary license. Another change in these regulations concerns who is eligible for an interim owner license. This category of license mentioned previously is not a full license, but does allow an operation to continue when there is a death of an owner, for instance. Previously, this was only available to card rooms. However, with the standardization of processes across license categories, that is no longer the case. Now this process also applies to third-party owners whose death could have a similarly negative impact on employees, third-party businesses generally, or the industry as a whole. This expansion to cover the entire owner license category reduces potential negative downstream consequences to those entities as well as the public during difficult times of transition. Licensees will no longer be able to act in the role of a key employee without a key employee license. This is different than it used to be, where a person could work in a key employee position for a 10-day period before even applying. It also clarifies what seems like common sense, specifically that a higher level of approval allows that person to act in a lower level position, meaning an owner licensee would allow the owner licensee holder to act as a key employee or work permittee, or a TPP as supervisor or TPP as worker as applicable. This regulation also establishes a requirement that card room owners must wear a badge for their establishment under specific circumstances. Prior to these regulations, card room owners were the only license category not required to wear a badge. This makes them inconsistent with the employees and TPPS workers who must also wear a badge. Importantly, the regulation also establishes that people who are not employees of a card room or TPPS business, but who are performing work for these entities and the type of work is the sort of thing that would typically require them to obtain a license if they were otherwise an employee of the card room or TPPS business. While this seems confusing, it basically means that card rooms or TPPS businesses can't avoid having licensed employees by farming out the work to unlicensed subcontractors. A corollary of this rule is that any supervisors of these individuals who are performing this type of work must also be licensed. The Overhaul also introduces a requirement that employers must notify the Bureau when an employee separates from employment. This is in addition to the mandate placed on employees who separate from employment, which currently requires they send notice. To reiterate a point of standardization raised previously, the review timelines for the Bureau and the Commission application is made consistent. This closes any strange inconsistency that led to some application types having a longer or shorter review timeline. An important minor addition in these regulations is the clarification that the Bureau and the Commission can object to locally issued work permits. This is currently in statute, but certain items were left unclear. This overhaul also clarifies that tribal findings of suitability follow the same process as key employees. This was previously also left unclear. An important addition will require that all applicants for renewal licenses will now be required to submit updated fingerprints. This provides important updates for the investigation process. Perhaps the biggest change, but with minimal industry impact, is the repeal of gambling businesses. Currently, there is only one of these, and generally the Commission has not received many applications. These regulations eliminate such businesses. This has the added benefit of deleting many duplicative and unnecessary regulatory text and pages. Another alteration that seems big but will have minimal impact is the end of the TPPS registration process for businesses and employees. Instead of receiving a registration, these entities will now receive a temporary license, similar to cardroom and TPPS owners. This is not a full license, but it will allow them to work while the background investigation and approval process is completed. This change will not happen overnight, though, and the regulations provide a transition period for current registration holders. Another big change concerns the creation of a Commission-designated agent. Designated agents have been defined in Bureau regulations and utilized far and wide beyond their original role. These DAs were even referenced in Commission regulations without definition, which created some uncertainty. These new regulations create a definition for DAs before the Commission and process for these individuals to represent many approval types before the Commission. DAs previously were only defined in Bureau regulations and could only technically represent cardroom owner licensees. Under these new regulations, these individuals now have a defined role before the Commission. They can also work with all application and license types. This means that the cardroom and TPPS owners, as well as their employees, can utilize a DA who is more experienced with approval process and providing documentation and responding to Bureau questions. These regulations, though, also provide guidance on how DAs are supposed to act in their role with applicants. This specifically includes standards of communication and representation so that the DA knows what is expected of them. In addition to the DA, it also means that the Bureau and Commission will know during the application process who they are supposed to communicate with. Lastly, the regulation also overhauls the annual payment structure that is present in current regulations. This process had changed very little before now and was in need of modernization. This includes the creation of the installment process for cardrooms to pay their annual fee. This provides cardrooms flexibility, especially in difficult times. Additionally, it creates a process for cardrooms to request a permanent reduction in their tables, which affects their fee payments. As we indicated at the start, there is a lot of changes in these regulations, and we can't go over all of them in one presentation. However, we know that questions will come up in your review of the regulations, as well as part of submitting a new application. Please know that we are here ready to answer your questions. Also, please note that there are a number of additional presentations covering specific topics in depth and more to be created in the future.